Alright guys, TouchGrub back again today. Hope you're enjoying your Wednesday so far, and today I was planning to talk about this OpTic Gaming Los Angeles move, which looks like it's going to be confirmed over the coming days. They're not playing this weekend in New York, so maybe they will postpone the announcement quite a bit, but you know, we're going to talk about that when the time comes. But instead we have to talk about this absolute chaos that went down last night on the timeline, with the pro player community supposedly banning out, in terms of a gentleman's agreement, the org from the meta. Yesterday we talked about how the new meta could favour some teams, could worsen some other teams, and we talked about how the org is kind of nice on a lot of different maps. However, some of the pros have decided it's too good and it's going to go, and honestly I think there's a lot of implications to talk about here. Once again, we're going to come back to the topic of certain pros like doing the well, at least choosing the options that benefit their team to the maximum ability, but also talking about the potential of the CDL having some sort of overarching structure which decides which of these GAs are allowed to continue and which are not, based on certain principles, which maybe we can talk about in coming minutes, because I haven't really seen the scene in this much chaos for a long time, quite frankly. Like, if you guys enjoy the video, subscribe if you're new. As always, I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, mentioning once again the draft royale for this weekend. Feel free to join that in the description box below, maybe also the pinned comment if I can be bothered. So here we go. First of all, from Journey, that came out on the timeline last night. Haggy right now in the amateur scene. I didn't GA anything, so a GA, if you guys aren't familiar, is a gentleman's agreement where the pros or just players in general come together and decide like certain things shouldn't be in the game due to competitive integrity, whether they lower the skill gap or anything like that. We talked about it the other day, like the knife being GA'd and all this kind of stuff. And well, it seemed to me somewhat inevitable that when the org started to come into the meta, it's this kind of funky gun with weird iron sights, doesn't aim down sight very quickly. It's just one of those classic weapons which some of the pros are going to decide, no, we don't want this in competitive play, it's got to go, and go back to the MP5 meta, which, you know, it doesn't surprise me, but again, it is kind of funny, right, given the fact that the whole season, or, well, you know, not the entire season, but a lot of the season, we've seen a lot of the pros talk about how the MP5 is just too strong, 4 MP5s on every map, like something's got to be done. Then the Merc foregrip goes instead of the 10mm. You could say, well, the 10mm was really the problem on the MP5, given it can map M4s at range. It's the 10mm that was doing that rather than the Merc foregrip. But they GA the Merc foregrip, and then it gets nerfed by Infinity Wards, and the Uzi suddenly with the 41 AE rounds and the AUG becomes viable. And within about a week of that being the case, we're back to just an MP5 meta where the pros decide, nah, okay, the Uzi's got to go, get rid of the ammo conversion on that, and then the AUG becomes somewhat viable as well, and they decide like that's not good enough either, which is just crazy, right? Like, the whole season we talk about how it's the MP5 and the M4 boring meta, and then when other alternatives come into play, we can't even use them. So yeah, it's very frustrating, I think, from the community perspective right now, seeing the pros act in this way. And it's not all the pros, but you know, I'm making generalizations, of course, and I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. As Journey says, that's the thing, why do we have to vote? Just follow the pros GAs, it's simple. So this is really where it kicked off. Yesterday we had this from Zinx as well, saying some very logical people got added to the chat. All challengers for NA are now following the pro gentleman's agreements. A few weeks ago we talked about how Parasite and some of the North American amateur challenger guys had decided that the ammo conversions were going to go, and then the pros followed suit on that one. So yesterday they decided that the org was going to go, the amateur North American scene, but then they said, look, it's kind of stupid that we're making our own GAs for our community, let's just follow what the pros are doing. So they backtracked on that just a little bit and said, okay, the org is still allowed for now, ammo, you know, is still not allowed based on what the pros GAs are. We did look at this clip yesterday from the org as well, that I'll just put on screen once again for you guys. Godorix getting absolutely destroyed by Priester. So, you know, we talked about the org in yesterday's video, and then we also got this clip from Sensor, right, where he was streaming last night and absolutely frying with the org as well. So maybe it looks like Sensor is the one that got the org GA'd, because I think he titled this one, I can't believe that was a headshot, by the way. I don't know if you guys noticed that. He shot him in the ankles, got a headshot for it. That's classic Modern Warfare right there. But yeah, Sensor was frying with the org. Then he tweets this out saying, like, is this gun, are we allowing this in competitive or whatever? Because clearly he thinks it's kind of too strong. We're allowing this gun in competitive. Then look what happens just after that. Simp says, rest in peace, pal, with the org looking like it's been GA'd out of the game. And in some reply to this, Abath, he says, it all happened so fast, blinked, and my practice the last few days got erased. And this is one of the key issues that we'll talk about in Priester's tweet in just a second here. The fact that some of the Atlanta FaZe guys and some of the Dallas guys that have been using this org, the rest of the league then decide they don't want it in competitive play, and all of a sudden the practice that they've had the last few days is completely erased and out the window, given that they've practiced with it for a few days now. The Uzi was practiced with for quite a while, like a week. Then you've got the org that's been in the meta for a couple of days, and then we get to a point where it's not in the meta at all. So as Cronut CDL Intel says right here, 7:38 PM, so I'm not exactly sure the times on this one, but I think this is Pacific time related. Amateurs GA the org. Just soon after that, they undo the org GA and decide to refollow the pro GAs only. And then guess what? 9:18 PM, pros decide to GA the org. And this is where Crimsix then comes out with this statement. Now, this was actually since deleted off his Twitter, which is kind of interesting, but he added the CoD League and he said, look, something has to be done about this. The org GA has crossed a line, in my opinion. So let's look through what Crimsix has to say. The problem with majority voting for GAs is that everyone wants to win. No one is simply okay with getting a top 8 placing. Anyone who isn't in the top 4 would rather change the meta than to take the harder, longer path of simply getting better. So I think this is true to some degree. Of course, it's easy to say when you are in the top 4 that every other team just wants to change the meta rather than trying to improve. But I think there is some truth to this, unfortunately. But, you know, it's just the case, I suppose. There's nothing really much you're going to do about it. Meaning that there is 8 out of 12 teams that are constantly voting to get rid of or add things into the meta to mix gameplay up, which sometimes results in the team power rankings also mixing up. I rarely ever see a team in the lower half of the standings voting against a proposed GA. This is a huge problem, and for the past 3 months I've been wondering which gun I'll be running the next week. Don't agree to the GAs? Get blacklisted. No practice for you until you agree. No team scrims and no 10s. This puts enormous amounts of pressure on the teams, risking potential loss of practice time for something that may or may not change how their team performs. So before you guys call pros stupid for GAing stuff, please understand that sometimes we don't actually have a choice in the matter, even though each team can vote. So, you know, this is very true, right? The fact that if you don't agree to the GAs, all of a sudden you're being blacklisted. And I think he has a point that says, like, the lower tier teams probably want to change stuff. That, like, let's say the last few days, like Atlanta FaZe and Dallas have been using this org in scrims. Lower tier teams that have been getting fried by Priester and Simp and Abizi or whoever's been using it are thinking like, damn, can we just get rid of this? Like, and if like majority of the teams agree, then that's the case. As we'll see Slash say in a second, though, it's not always the case. Like, it is the case sometimes that the best teams in the game also do agree to some gentleman's agreements, like in the World War II days with the long barrel on the bar. But you know, we have this tweet from Priester, and I think this is a pretty good thread. So Slasher says, yeah, you are right. Let's get rid of all G8 and play with 5 smokes. I don't really think that's exactly what Crimsix is advocating here, but you know, Slasher says, you know, he didn't really advocate the org stuff regardless. And Crimsix says the tactical specialist GAs are the only necessary GAs. And this is an interesting discussion, right, on how exactly do you deem those to be necessary GAs? What guidelines do you use to determine which GAs are allowed and which GAs aren't, right? And this is where something needs to be cleared up with the CDL and, you know, with Infinity Ward and the developers more generally. Going into future games, we need to have some sort of overarching body that says, look, these GAs are allowed, these GAs are legitimate, have some sort of official, like, talk about it behind the scenes with the developers and with the CDL to decide what goes. Because right now I imagine the pros just get in a Discord call, have a chat about they want to get rid of, and then they get rid of that. Like, that's hardly a professional league structure and doesn't make it fair, I think, to some teams that don't want it gone, right? Like, what exactly counts as a majority? Is it 9 teams? Is it 10 teams? There's no official guidance on this, and there's no official guidance that says, okay, certain GAs are somewhat legitimate due to these reasons, certain GAs are maybe taking it too far, like the org one. I think a lot of people would say the org one was taking things too far. I was almost kind of getting forward to, or looking forward to, at least a 3-gun meta like we had last season. So, you know, and this is important. Multiple times the best team has agreed. So Rise World War II when they were dominating the game. Long Barrel Bar, TK World War II, the FG early on. Splice Stock 2. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. So your argument is false. There's probably others too. So the FG, of course, early in World War II, and Accuracy and that guy and those guys on the TK team were absolutely dominating. They got rid of it. But I definitely think this from Priester shows how frustrating it has been. I just want to know why the org was G8. It's 3 days before a tourney. Wouldn't it make sense to GA it after? Like, why did I just practice with this gun the entire time? So this is true to some degree. Then again, there is events back to back to back. So even if you were to GA it after this weekend, there would still only be like 4 days to practice with the next one, or for the next one without the org. So maybe it doesn't matter too much when exactly you GA it. But as Slasher says, Preston, you use the org for 2 to 3 days. You use the MP5 for 200. I don't know why. And like I said, I don't care if it happened or not. I agreed because I'd rather just stick to the MP5 M4 at this point. Personally, I get that I've used it more, but it's also changed a lot since the beginning of the year, and the M4 hasn't changed at all other than no stock. That's not really even noticeable. How is the M4 not GAs? All I've went to is from Uzi to MP5 or MP7 to MP5 to AUG since update, and now the new method gets developed and the gun gets GA'd 3 days before a tourney. So very frustrating, I'm sure, for players that have been using this for the last few days, and then the professionals decide, okay, well, you know, professionals on the whole in terms of like 8 out of 12 or whatever you need to pass a GA, I don't exactly know how it works, because none of this stuff is really made public, right? So in this thread as well, realistically, there should actually be a small group of trusted individuals to do it. The way it's done now, prayers, that's why I don't deal with it much anymore. Slash World League, you know, is better than anything. Teams vote with bias, been saying this, why sometimes it gets absurd and lame, but everyone wants to say, so it's hard not to involve every team. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. We were almost undefeated through 2 events with the long barrel bar in play at the, you're talking about the Rise Nation team once again, the World War II days. So like, it just, the CDL needs to step in here and have some sort of say. We can't just allow the pros, I don't think, to just run the scene like this, especially when there's so many difficult decisions to be made. What should be allowed, what shouldn't be? Is it going too far? And I think, you know, it certainly is to some degree. I think this is frustrating a lot of fans, and it's certainly frustrating me, keep having to talk about it. I understand the necessity of GAs at times, but this is arguably for me taking it a little bit too far, especially when, as I talked about at the start of the video, we've had complaints of how good the MP5 is. When other guns come into the meta potentially, then all of a sudden we're back to a 2-gun meta after all, even though not all the pros agree and a lot of pros are frustrated about it. There needs to be some sort of, you know, some sort of overarching decision making that this can be made so it's actually fair and the pros don't get so bitter and, you know, understandably bitter in some cases, that there's a whole Twitter spat that goes down every single time anything like this happens. Crimsix's solution is to say the only GA that makes sense right now would be to remove all the weapon GAs, or just go back to the AW Bal Matter and meta and have everyone using an M4 in respawn can snipe at S&D. So, you know, I would not want to watch that by any means. Just to finish off the video, this clip from a beta that came out yesterday cannot teach this source. He was actually frying in this one, but the interesting part of this is the opposing team. As Cronut CDL Intel points out, if you zoom in right here, we can see Nagafen, Royalty, I believe that's Standy, Felony, and Douglas Sensor Martin on this team. So it could be a potential new challenger squads. Keep an eye on that going forwards. Intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Like if you guys enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new. I will see you next time.